This is South Africa and its 9 provinces. Now, I want to ask you a question. Let's pretend for a second that you don't know anything about this country and the only information you're given is that the country has a population of 60 million people. What percentage of that population do you think would be here? And what percentage of the South African population do you think would be here? With 372,889 square kilometers, Northern Cape is the elephant. This province is so big that if you put 4 other provinces in South Africa inside it, you'll still have a landmass that's bigger than countries like Sierra Leone, Togo, or 3 size of Rwanda. However, even though Northern Cape province is bigger than some countries, there's a curious twist in South Africa's demographic story. Look here. This is Gauteng. With a tiny 18,176 square kilometers, Gauteng is just a little bigger than my bedroom. Okay, that was a joke. But this is by far the smallest province in South Africa. But guess what? As of 2024, an estimated 16.1 million people, which is 26% of the entire South Africans, lived here, while this place is almost empty. What's going on here? Why is the largest province of South Africa almost empty? And why do more than 1/4 of South Africans live in this tiny place? These 2 questions make you even more curious if you're reminded that Natal and Eastern Cape used to be the most populated regions of what is known today as South Africa. So this video will have 3 parts and answer 3 questions. In part 1, we will answer why were Natal and Eastern Cape the most populated in the past. In part 2, we will answer why did everyone suddenly move here in 1886. And the third part will answer why this place is empty. Now, let's get into the business. Before 1886, in the territory known today as South Africa, Natal and Eastern Cape were the 2 most populated territories, thanks to this man. Born in 1787, Shaka Zulu was the child of a king, King Senzangakona of the Zulu Kingdom, located in a town called Bulawayo, near the present-day town of Ulundi in the KwaZulu-Natal province of South Africa. But there was a problem. Even though Shaka was a prince, all through his childhood, he faced discrimination, isolation, and hatred from his father and family members because he was regarded as an illegitimate child. But why? Why wasn't Shaka recognized as a legitimate child of his father? Well, the reason why Shaka Zulu wasn't recognized as a legitimate child was because even though his father, King Senzangakona, was polygamous and had more than 16 wives, he also had countless concubines, which we would call side chicks today. Shaka Zulu's mother, Nandi, happened to be one of those side chicks, and that was the reason why her son was not recognized as a legitimate child. Because in Zulu culture, formal marriage involves specific rituals and ceremonies, just as marriages today require that you sign some documents that would make you lose half of your assets in the next 13 months when that woman is tired of you. Okay, let's get serious here. Being born by a side chick in the absence of traditional rituals and ceremonies, Shaka was considered a bastard. And to make matters worse, his father, King Senzangakona, disputed his paternity, claiming that his side chick Nandi became pregnant because she was sick. You heard that right. King Senzangakona claimed that Nandi became pregnant because she was sick, which makes you wonder how dumb people were before modern science. Anyways, due to all these controversies and conflicts around Shaka's birth, Nandi, Shaka's mother, felt that she and her son were on the fringes of society, so she fled to exile together with her 5-year-old Shaka. While in exile, which took place in the Mtetwa territory somewhere here, specifically with the Mtetwa people under Chief Nkosi Dingiswayo, Shaka was exposed to hunting and excellent military training. This part of the story is going to be useful for understanding the rest of this section, so don't forget it. Chief Dingiswayo, who was Shaka's mother's host, was a great warrior, and under his tutelage, Shaka was initiated into an Ibuto Lempi, which is what they called a fighting unit those days. However, after serving as a warrior under Dingiswayo for some time and becoming a military leader who refined the Ibuto military system, Shaka returned to his Zulu clan sometime around 1813, and just 3 years later, in 1816, Shaka's father, King Senzagakona, died. When Senzagakona died, Shaka was passed over for the title of king again because he was an illegitimate child. Instead, his younger half-brother, who was a legitimate son, Prince Sigujana, was chosen as king. Sigujana became the king in 1816, but he wouldn't last more than a few weeks because Shaka would delete him. At this point in the story, I need you to remember what I told you earlier about this guy. That's Chief Dingiswayo. He was the chief warrior of the Mtetwa people whom Shaka's mother ran to while in exile, and he was the same man who trained Shaka to be a warrior. Now, Shaka needed him to become king of the Zulu kingdom. Shaka asked Dingiswayo to supply him with some fighters. He gathered an army, planned a coup, and while King Sigujana was in the vicinity of the royal homestead of Kwaduguza, a town 55 kilometers north of Durban in present-day South Africa, Shaka deleted him and declared himself a king. This is the point where all the stories I've been telling you start to make sense. You see, when Shaka Zulu became the king of the Zulu kingdom, he was not just one of those kings. He was a man with a troubled childhood. He was a rejected and abandoned prince who fled to exile, and while in exile, he had learned how to wage wars. Now as a king, Shaka was a warrior, a military strategist, and a brutal dictator. Let's talk about this and keep the last part for later. Being a great warrior meant that Shaka Zulu was able to build a strong army. Because nobody wants to attack a country with a nuclear weapon, most of Shaka's enemies just won't go near his border. Yes, I know there was no nuclear weapon in the 19th century, but you get the idea. Shaka's strengths made his territory peaceful. On page 248 of his 1955 book, Shaka Zulu, The Rise of the Zulu Empire, E.A. Ritter wrote, "The empire Shaka Zulu had built rested on a foundation of blood and terror, but within it, there was order, purpose, and an undeniable power. This order, purpose, and power that King Zulu created within his empire were one of the reasons why this territory was the most populated in 19th century South Africa. This was so because historically, people were more likely to migrate to places that gave them a sense of safety, stability, and order. Plus, don't forget, to be a powerful emperor in those days was to be a thief. You steal the resources of your neighbors, their lands, their women and young men. This also makes your empire more populated." This territory's proximity to the Indian Ocean was another reason why it was the most populated, because coastal cities tend to enjoy more international trades, and nothing attracts people to a place than the possibility of making some moolah. But nothing lasts forever. The third point I made here later led to the downfall of Shaka Zulu. It was so dramatic because it has something to do with his mother, Nandi, but we'll have to discuss that later in this video. For now, let's talk about how suddenly in 1886, everyone started migrating to this tiny place, and now it's the most populated province in South Africa.
Now, Gauteng, which houses more than a third of South Africa's gross domestic product, is the economic engine of the nation.
Gauteng is fast becoming the financial services capital of Africa.
Gauteng.
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 Gauteng. Gauteng.
Gauteng province is what?
Gauteng.
Gauteng. It's the bedrock of the economy.
The name Gauteng was derived from the Sotho-Tswana word Gauta, meaning gold, because gold was what built this province. Let me explain. In 1885, a South African landowner named Gerhardus Oosthuizen granted prospecting rights to some gold prospectors. Skilled geologists like George Walker and Frederick Struben recognized the potential of the Witwatersrand gold-bearing reefs and were willing to prospect gold in this area. Witwatersrand is a mountain range a long elevated ridge stretching across Gauteng province, and it was what happened here in 1886 that would make Gauteng, the smallest province of South Africa, become the most populated literally overnight. You see, for thousands of years, people have known that there is gold in southern Africa. In 1334, Ibn Battuta, who was an Arab scholar and traveler, wrote about southern Africa. The land of Sofala abounds in gold, which the natives wear on their wrists and ankles. In 1505, Portuguese traveler and merchant Duarte Lopes wrote, "Among the Kaffirs, those who are rich wear ornaments of gold in their ears and about their necks." The indigenous communities of southern Africa like the Khoi and San were aware of gold presence in their territories and used it for rituals. Yeah, these guys were given millions of dollars worth of gold. I mean gold to gods. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Dutch explorers like Anthony van Riebeeck documented the presence of gold in South Africa but focused on establishing trade and agriculture. Then came the 19th century. 1873 saw a reasonable quantity of gold being discovered here, followed by another here in 1875. Even though these two major discoveries didn't lead to a gold rush because the reserves were not as much as was predicted and the gold proved difficult to extract, they were enough to spread a rumor around the world that a region of Africa has soil that has no sand or stone, but gold and gold. This rumor attracted hundreds of gold prospectors to southern Africa, while existing prospectors intensified their search for the yellow metal. Individual prospectors like Francis Oates, John Sutherland, George Harrison, and George Walker explored the Witwatersrand region, the first two men in 1870s and the last two in 1880s. In 1886, George Harrison, who was an Australian prospector, claimed to have found the main reef, the richest gold deposit on the Rand, located on a farm called Langlagte, situated close to the southern edge of the Witwatersrand, near present-day Johannesburg. He reported his discovery to the authorities, securing the claim and sparking the initial gold rush. George Walker, an established prospector and friend of Harrison, contested Harrison's claim. He asserted that he had found the gold first and shared the information with Harrison in confidence, but Walker's version of the story lacked concrete evidence, creating controversy and doubt. Despite the fact that the claims of the two judges were shrouded in mysteries and conflicts, and none of them really made reasonable money from gold, their discovery was genuine. Newspapers around the world, the Evening Standard in England, New York Times in America, the Sydney Morning Herald in Australia, Le Figaro in France, and much other international newspapers across the globe reported about the Gauteng gold discovery, and that led to the craziest gold rush in the history of mankind. Yes, before this time, the world had seen the California gold rush of 1848, the Australian gold rush of 1851, and the Klondike gold rush of Canada in 1896. But none of these was anything compared to the Witwatersrand gold rush of 1886. Then you may want to ask, why was the Witwatersrand gold rush special? Witwatersrand gold rush was special because Witwatersrand had the largest gold reserves in the whole world. The world's richest gold field with extensive gold-bearing reefs stretching for over 80 kilometers.
The Golden City, South Africa's Johannesburg. 70 years have brought a small township to rank with the world's richest cities, and it's still growing fast. A center of gold mining, of industry and commerce, Johannesburg creates enormous wealth, which produces 8 million ounces of gold a year. To get things like this one at Blijvoorditsicht make South Africa one of the largest gold-producing countries in the world. In fact, 2/3 of the West's gold comes from these fields.
As of the time of making this video, the Witwatersrand Basin has produced over 1.3 billion ounces of gold, representing about 22% of all the gold ever accounted for above the surface of the earth, and this potential was identified as far back as 1886. Because of this, hundreds of people trekked 3,000, 4,000 and even 5,000 kilometers on foot within Africa and outside the continent to reach South Africa. Wealthy gold dealers around the world traveled via luxurious ocean liner like this one. Thousands of poor people built a makeshift raft with salvaged wood and tarpaulin, then set sail across treacherous oceans, battling storms and hunger for weeks before making it to South Africa. Many from England, Italy, Russia, America, and the rest of the world embarked on the journey to South Africa via wind-powered sailing ships that looked like this. This thing can only run about 35 kilometers per hour in favorable weather conditions, so be prepared to spend 3 to 7 months on the sea. And because there was no technology to accurately predict the weather, if severe weather conditions such as storms, hurricanes, and typhoons struck, you're welcome to your new home inside the stomach of this nice guy. For 36 years between 1886 and 1922, tens of thousands of people within and outside South Africa made their way to Gauteng. In his 1948 book, Cry, The Beloved Country, Alan Paton wrote about this event as follows. Men from everywhere, drawn by the whisper of wealth, swarmed into this land like ants over a melon rind. They called it Johannesburg, this city built of corrugated iron and dust, where men coughed gold and spat blood. Although the majority of these people who traveled several miles in the hope of becoming rich from gold never became rich, their presence and the presence of gold in this region had changed everything forever. Then you may want to ask, how did the presence of these people change Gauteng? You see, some of these people have jobs in Gauteng as gold miners, others as geologists, accountants, medic, cooks, truck drivers, security guards, logistics coordinators, etc., while others roam aimlessly in between the mountains with the hope of finding gold. But every one of these people who ran to Gauteng needed to buy something. These people would need to eat, drink, cut their hair, buy soap, clothes, shoes, and rent a home. The few who had a lot of money would need to save money in the bank, buy a new bicycle, a home, new furniture, and spend money on prostitutes. Okay, don't do that when you make money, but you get the idea. When people make money, they spend it on necessities as well as on vanities, and both of these are very good for the economy, which then meant that from the discovery of gold in Gauteng, suddenly two other industries emerged: service and manufacturing. In economics, anything such as eating in a restaurant, cutting your hair, traveling from point A to B, visiting a doctor, and 1,000 other things are considered the service industry, while the businesses aiming to manufacture bicycles, shoes, or furniture for these people would be categorized as being under the manufacturing industry. Now, what you will notice here is that from this primary industry, we've created the secondary industry and a tertiary industry. The next thing that will happen is that thousands of people would now migrate to this area, not because they care about gold, but because of these two industries. For example, you have people from all across South Africa migrating to Gauteng because they want to go and work in a restaurant, grocery store, or bank. You have investors traveling from all across the globe because they want to go and start a shoe manufacturing company, a bank, or a nightclub. Did they even have nightclubs in the 19th century? I don't know, but let's pretend they did. As more and more people migrate to Gauteng because of these two industries, those people too would need to eat, buy clothes, shoes, bags, and rent homes, making the manufacturing industry big and the service industry even bigger. 50 years later, even if gold disappears or the mining activities reduce just as South African gold mining activities have started reducing since 1970, the economy of a place like Gauteng will remain strong because these two industries have grown so big that they are more than gold that started it all. Hence, the reason why Gauteng is the most populated and the center of gravity for everything in South Africa.
Gauteng.
Gauteng.
Gauteng. Gauteng. Gauteng.
Gauteng. Gauteng.
Gauteng.
Gauteng. Gauteng.
Gauteng is South Africa's economic nerve center and biggest contributor to the country's GDP.
Now, Gauteng is well known as the place of gold, appropriate as it is gold that built it to become Africa's richest province contributing nearly 35% of South Africa's gross domestic product.
Gauteng is the economic heart of the country.
Gauteng is the most visited province in the country, as it's traditionally been the primary point of entry for international visitors.
Gauteng is the economic and industrial hub of South Africa and the African continent.
We see ourselves as the gateway to Africa, simply because Gauteng contributes a bigger chunk of our GDP, both in South Africa and as well as in the African continent.
The Northern Cape province of South Africa has a population of just 1.3 million as of 2023, making it the least populated province in South Africa. While it may be logical to think that a lot of people ought to live in a place that has a lot of space, like the Northern Cape in South Africa, for example, most times bigger isn't always better.
Even if it looks frustrating to the crowd.
Oh my God! Oh my God! He tapped out! Unbelievable!
When it comes to a territory, the quality of the landmass is more important than the quantity. Now, let's make a list of few reasons why most South Africans don't live in the Northern Cape. Much of the Northern Cape province experiences hot, dry summers and cold winters with limited rainfall. This makes large-scale agriculture challenging, limiting food production and the ability to sustain large populations. Due to the arid climate, much of the landscape is covered by semi-desert and desert ecosystems, offering limited natural resources and grazing land for livestock. Water scarcity was another problem. Since access to fresh water is crucial for human settlements and economic activities, and most of Northern Cape province lacks fresh water, it's simply unattractive for people to stay there.
We have a serious water challenge in this area. Sometimes we can go weeks without water. And when there is water in the taps, it is dirty.
As I've said at the beginning of this video, the Northern Cape is vast with long distances between settlements and towns. This creates logistical challenges for infrastructure development, healthcare access, and economic opportunities, discouraging population growth. This also means that the province is geographically isolated from major economic hubs and population centers, limiting trade and investment opportunities that could attract people. Starting from 1890, South Africa, like many developing countries, started experiencing urbanization, with people migrating towards cities for better opportunities. The Northern Cape's remote location and limited urban centers makes it less attractive for such migration compared to coastal provinces or Gauteng. I started this video with the story of Shaka Zulu, how he was isolated and discriminated against because his mother was not a legitimate wife of King Senzangakona, hence he was considered an illegitimate child. While in exile, under this guy, he learned how to fight and wage war. Then when he returned to his Zulu home in 1813 and his father died in 1816, he desired to become the king, planned a coup, and deleted his younger brother who was the king. I told you about how Shaka's strength made his neighbors afraid of him. Hence, his territory was peaceful, which attracted migration to this territory, which was why Natal in present-day South Africa was the most populated in this era. Yes, I remember that I promised to talk about this and how it led to Shaka's downfall. You see, like every other dictator the world has ever had, Shaka Zulu kept on making more and more enemies, among which were Dingane and Mlangana, Shaka's half-brothers. These guys made at least 2 failed assassination attempts on Shaka's life, and when his mother Nandi died in October 1827, he seemed to be very devastated, let his guard down, and 11 months later, in September 1828, his half-brothers Dingane and Mlangana deleted him, right at his military barracks in Kwaduguza. Part 2 of this video is about how the discovery of gold here led to a gold rush and booming service and manufacturing industries which attracted hundreds of thousands of people to Gauteng. In part 3, we talked about the reason why, even though it's the biggest province by landmass, only about 1.3 million people live in the Northern Cape province. Now as we get to the end of this video, I need to tell you two things. It took me and my team about 2 weeks of hard work to research, write the script, and make this video. We try so hard to present accurate facts and interesting stories. But because histories sometimes have faces, some people might have a different truth than we presented in this video. In that case, we'll appreciate your positive criticism. Thanks, and make sure you subscribe if you don't want Shaka Zulu to appear in your dream tonight.